This is Seemorerocks reporting from Down Under, and I'd like to introduce you my partner of 25 years and
Hi everyone.
co-conspirator, and I think she just wants to ask some questions for the blog.
G'day Robin.
Hello, Pam.
Hi everyone. So Robin, it'll be 7 years in April, I think, since you started this blog, Seemorerocks, and you're approaching 6 million views over that time. What was the spark that got you going on this, and why do you do it?
Okay. Well, I think the spark was possibly back in 2010 and coming across Mike Rupert and his work, and he kind of threw my whole world and a lot of my assumptions upside down. And then, of course, since then, I've had other assumptions that have been thrown upside down. In fact, it seems to be happening regularly. And then another immediate thing was a very dear friend of mine. We were going through all the things that I could do for transition towns, and she made a list. One of the things was to get Mike Rupert onto Radio New Zealand. The other one was to start a blog, and the rest is history. Yeah.
As somebody who sees you most days and gets a download or reads what's on the blog or what's coming through Facebook, there seem currently to be two main strands, which is the geopolitical complexity, and obviously you've been documenting sort of abrupt climate change for a very long time, looking both locally at what's happening in our very own Hutt Valley, but particularly, I think, globally. So one of the questions that brings up for me is just what changes are you seeing, like particularly thinking about climate change over that 6 years that you've been following, Guy McPherson and others. What's changed? What are you seeing?
Well, when I first started the blog, most of the stuff that I was doing was on peak oil, and my very first piece, was quoting, from 350.org, and then as I sort of further I went, I started hearing about the problem with methane. And then I was sort of looking for some sort of confirmation of that, and I never found it, and that just drove me absolutely so crazy. And then the other thing over the 6 years was at the very beginning, I was looking for any article in the mainstream, not on the specialist press, about climate change, and it was very, very rare. And then all of a sudden it seems to have flipped. We get all these headlines, greater than previously expected, and then all sorts of sort of dire articles, but they all sort of fall short of the mark as far as the actual observations of what's happened. So I've got a bit tired of kind of covering each of those articles. I used to be on the search for them, but so I've decided really not to post any of those sort of articles, but rather only report on those things that are happening kind of in real time, in the Arctic and the Amazon or whatever, and the manifestations of climate change, rather than using the mainstream media to try and persuade people of something. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, yeah. and it just brings to mind your dissatisfaction with the climate change models that are used to predict what we could expect to see based on what's happening now in 5, 10 or 20 years time, and the failure of those models to actually keep pace with what's happening with the exponential speed.
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm probably not the best person to sort of comment on this, but what I see is that in the reports, they talk about what's happening in the models, but the models have been shown to be wildly inaccurate, and things that were predicted to be happening at the end of the century are happening now. I mean, practically in real time as I observe it, certainly from year to year, rather than from decade to decade. Yeah, so that's really what I observe. So what I'm trying to do is provide some sort of counterbalance to that, because really the situation in the mass media is really to misrepresent and someone said to trivialize, really. I think that's what a lot of what I see in the media is trivialization of the most serious predicament that's facing the human species. So I want to provide some sort of counterbalance to that. Yeah.
How do you plan from this huge? I mean, there's so much happening all the time on every front. How do you, or do you, have a sort of process that leads you to select particular things for your blog, say over a day or a week, or is it a bit random?
Well, no, it's never random, but I mean, I do have some sort of themes, and I do try again something that the mass media doesn't do. I try to follow up, and a story if something becomes a headline, and then I try to follow up to to see what has happened to it. I mean, I don't always have the time to do that, but the way in which I plan it is really, as you know, I start every day with get out my iPad almost on waking up. I'm lying in bed and I'm going through
He does, it's true.
all the headlines from
Yes.
from those sort of media outlets that I trust most, and then from what people are posting on Facebook. And then I have a couple of very, very good Facebook friends, one of whom has been with me for a lot of the time that I've been doing the blog, and they both provide intelligence of what they think is urgent stuff, especially when it comes to politics and in the United States and
Right.
geopolitics. Yeah. So I've sort of developed these places that I go, voices that I trust, and that's kind of how I decide it.
It must be interesting for you too, with the time difference, because a lot of what you're covering, of course, is in the northern hemisphere, probably most of it. So we're down here, and it's sort of it's morning. It's it's 11 a.m. past 11 a.m. in the morning now, but you know that the places you're writing about are probably going to be, in the darkness. Well, so that's an interesting. How does that work?
Well, that can work to my advantage. I mean, sometimes a lot of headlines happen. They came sort of during the night, and I just have to sort of play follow up. But then some things I'm able to get scoops on things that almost before anybody else, and it's always deeply satisfying when I get there before the local media. In fact, sometimes they don't even get there at all, but never mind. Yes.
So if you had to pick, like today, is there anything today that you think I have got to? This requires, some analysis.
Today seems to be a day that so far, I mean, I don't think I can ever get through a day when there's not something major. If it's major in the morning, then probably there'll be something by the end of the day. But today, I think the biggest thing is actually the climate change news, which is that if you smooth out the graph to take away the effect of the El Nino a couple of years ago, or the present La Nina, that 2017 was in fact the hottest year on record, whereas most of the media is saying it was near top.
Is that right?
Yes.
Gosh, certainly here in where we live in Wellington, it's been extremely hot and dry, really, for days on end. And we've just bought a digital thermometer, and there's very little difference between the nighttime temperature, the lowest, and the highest, which is something that I haven't noticed down here before.
Yeah, well, certainly since December, we've hardly had any rain, and when we did, that brought the temperature down, and the media was sort of full of this, the end of summer and stuff. But in fact, actually, on measuring it, it only ever brought the temperature down to what, in fact, is the average for this time of year, which is about 18 degrees. So it's never, ever, at any stage during this summer, gone below that. And of course, we have this huge hotspot, in the Tasman Sea, and to me, it's a huge worry because of what's sort of happening, in real time in the Arctic. I mean, the Arctic ice is super thin. We've got this polar vortex in the northern hemisphere, which, by the way, is now sort of split into two, and it's got an eye somewhere in the Mediterranean, so it's bringing some terrible weather, there. But the news that I've heard is that there might be that the present La Nina, which is supposed to bring cooling conditions, which isn't, is supposed to develop into an El Nino sometime either in the northern spring, spring and or the northern summer. So that's, if we're getting these conditions now in the southern hemisphere, I'm very nervous about what's going to happen in 3, 4, 5, 6 months to a year.
Sure. I know, Robin, you've been keeping a bit of an eye on some of the, I guess, symptoms in our own marine environment around, New Zealand, that things are really awry. Just little stories that many people wouldn't even think about, this gull or this dotterel. But do you want to just mention a couple of local stories?
I think you're probably better at doing that than me, but I do try and follow these particular stories about what's happening to the seagulls. But I mean, usually I'm very, very down on Radio New Zealand, but they did do a very good piece over the summer where they actually had a zoologist and a climate change scientist getting together and exchanging notes and talking about what is in fact happening. And I can't. You might remember some of the details better than I can.
I won't repeat it, but perhaps you could repost it on your blog, Robin. But Alison Balance, who's a zoologist and also runs the weekly science program for Radio New Zealand, was talking about the impact on plankton, from phytoplankton up to zooplankton, and how that's already affecting, many species. And we've seen it around our waters now with lots of, birds turning up unable to feed their young, in some cases feeding them jellyfish because there's been such an invasion.
And then some species of fish are sort of appearing far further south than they ever have before.
And then, the conversation was with Dr. Jim Salinger, formerly with NIWA, and it was very good. I think it was just looking at that big picture, and it's rare, really, for people to look at a whole system of any sort, isn't it? as opposed to, people from, looking at the
Mm.
sort of the ecosystem and the climate system. And when you look at them together, you realise, gosh, there are massive implications.
Yeah, and that's been the great achievement of Professor Guy McPherson, that he has actually, as a conservation biologist, he's brought his concern and knowledge, deep knowledge of climate change together with his knowledge of,
Living systems.
speciation and extinction, and how, the average temperature on the planet doesn't have to go very far up before we don't have the habitats left to support many species, including our own species.
So here's a challenge for you.
Oh.
I was asked by a lovely young guy, pretty well informed, in a shop I shop at regularly to get organic produce. We were talking about the heat, of course, the weather, and the hot blob in the ocean, which he mentioned, and he said, so, why is that there? What's the cause? And I sort of attempted to explain it, but I realised that I didn't actually have the complete picture. And what would you, in a nutshell, how would you say that, to anyone, to a young person in particular, who's obviously already looking at
Well,
this?
I don't know, really. I suppose I would show. I always try to put things in their global perspective, and because everything on the media is always kind of as if, we're completely isolated, from everywhere else, and we've got no connection with the Arctic and even the Antarctic. To show a global map, and you will see that at the moment, because probably of some very specific conditions, we've got this huge blob in the Tasman Sea, but it's, if you have a look, there are many, many areas. In fact, most areas of ocean are much warmer than than the historical average. And the seas around the United States, the Mediterranean, and of course the Arctic.
So ultimately, it's warming of the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's warming of the atmosphere. I think the best person to explain the sort of mechanics of all of this, and he talks about how this affects the jet stream, and how what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay there. It affects the whole planet. And he, Paul Beckwith, and he describes that mechanism very well, better than I can.
That's pretty much what I said. And I also suggested that you look at, is it Null School? The maps. I suggested.
Well, not Null School, possibly climate reanalyzing, because that gives all the.
I'll go back and have a further conversation with him. So, just wrapping up, how are you? I know your health. I do know your health is not good, and I sometimes wonder, what is it about this work that keeps you going? So there's a couple of questions there. How are you, if you want to tell us, and what actually keeps you going?
Well,
it's hard work.
I don't sort of see it as hard. It becomes hard work because of some of the problems I have to deal with, like just about every day. Today everything's working fine, but other times, especially, I've noticed every time I'm working with some sort of controversial or subject, often my computer just suddenly, and without seemingly any explanation, seizes up, and I find it takes me about 4 times as long to do anything. So that's hugely stressful. But my own health is sort of at a kind of plateau, but sort of slowly sliding. And really, I only have 2 or 3, maximum 4 hours in the day when I can actually do something. And the rest I just have to sort of take a rest from it. So the motivation partially is I don't think I need to persuade anyone of anything. If they haven't been persuaded of it by now, there's something wrong. But it's really just chronicling the whole the whole thing. And of course, it's my blog, so I post what interests me, which may not correspond with what other people, individuals might expect. So partially, it's also, if I wasn't doing it, I don't know what I would do, because I used to go out and ride horses and and go trekking and do yoga and all of these things. Had a very active life, and I don't have that opportunity anymore. So what am I going to do with my life? And I do want to do the best I can with the time I have. So this is my answer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
And we were going to get on to some other geopolitics, but that I think
Another
might
day.
be for another time.
Yeah.
Anyway, hope you've enjoyed this, and look forward to talking to you sometime soon. Bye.
Bye.